Welcome to this deep dive explainer. Today, we're plunging way beneath the surface of the world's biggest sporting event to uncover a history of systemic allegations, complex geopolitics, and ultimately devastating conflict. We aren't just looking at the goals or the glory here. Instead, we're going to take a really hard look at the geopolitical machinery and the socioeconomic realities that have historically operated behind the scenes of the beautiful game. Okay, let's dive right into this. We're starting right at the top of the organization with this explosive statement. Quote, in Germany in 1974, the same thing happened. It was planned for the host countries to win. Now, you might be thinking this is a quote from some disgruntled fan or a late-night conspiracy theorist, right? Well, it's not. This is a direct, on-the-record claim made by João Havelange, the man who actually served as FIFA president from 1974 all the way to 1998. He openly alleged that outcomes in both the 1966 and 1974 tournaments were flat-out manipulated. Section 1. Fixing the beautiful game. So breaking down Havelange's specific claims, we can see he didn't just throw out vague accusations, he pointed directly to how officials were assigned. During the 1966 World Cup in England, across the 3 matches played by the defending champions, Brazil, 7 of the officials were British and 2 were German. Brazil ended up being eliminated after some famously rough play. Then, if you look at the quarterfinals of that exact same tournament, England's match against Argentina was overseen by a German referee, while Germany's match against Uruguay was overseen by an English referee. Havelange claimed this was a systemic setup. Fast forward to 1974, when Brazil lost a crucial match to Holland 2-0, which ensured host nation Germany's path to the title, the referee was, once again, German. He claimed these assignments were meticulously planned to make absolutely sure European host nations advanced. Section 2. Geopolitics and World Cup boycotts. Now, the road to Mexico in 1970 was incredibly turbulent. They faced 3 distinct geopolitical crises that seriously threatened to derail the entire qualification process. First up, following the 1966 tournament, the Confederation of African Football, or CAF, threatened a mass boycott unless Africa was finally given a dedicated guaranteed slot in the tournament. Second, because of the ongoing Arab-Israeli conflict, Arab nations flatly refused to play against Israel in the Asian qualification zone. And third, United Nations sanctions against the unrecognized white minority government in Rhodesia led to direct boycott from Japan and South Korea, who absolutely refused to compete against them. And this perfectly illustrates exactly how the governing body handled those intense political pressures. Getting to Mexico was clearly about much more than just on-field merit. In response to the CAF boycott threat, well, FIFA conceded and created 1 dedicated slot for Africa, which Morocco ultimately secured. To solve the Arab boycott, FIFA completely moved Israel out of the Asian zone and placed them into the Oceania zone, where they eventually qualified after playing Australia. And as for Rhodesia, FIFA basically bypassed a full round robin, forcing them to play neutral venue matches in Mozambique against Australia. Rhodesia was eventually eliminated on the pitch and then retroactively suspended by FIFA for 2 years. So the crucial point here is that political appeasement and boycott pressures heavily dictated the actual structure of the tournament. Section 3. The Football War Myth. Let's look at the chronological escalation surrounding these 3 explosive World Cup qualifiers. On June 8th, the first leg was held in the Honduran capital, Tegucigalpa. Honduran fans harassed the Salvadoran team all night, literally throwing rocks at their hotel. Honduras won that game 1-0. Just a week later, on June 15th, the return leg in San Salvador saw Salvadoran fans seeking vengeance. They rioted outside the Honduran team's hotel, which tragically led to several deaths. A dirty rag was even hoisted instead of the Honduran flag at the stadium. El Salvador won that one 3-0. This back and forth necessitated a final playoff on June 27th in neutral Mexico City, where El Salvador ultimately won 3-2 in extra time. Now here is what you really should take away from this explainer today. The qualifiers ignited a powder keg? Absolutely. But football did not cause the war. The rioting and that extreme nationalist fervor surrounding these matches merely sparked a fire that had literally been building for decades. To understand the real cause, we have to look away from the stadium. Section 4. A deep dive into conflict. The root of the issue was extreme demographics. By 1969, El Salvador was severely overpopulated. We're talking 3.5 million people packed into the smallest country in Central America, creating an extreme density of over 160 people per square kilometer. Right next door was Honduras. Now, Honduras had a much smaller population of 2.6 million people, but it boasted 5 times the landmass of El Salvador. Because of this massive disparity in space and opportunity, roughly 300,000 desperate Salvadorans had migrated across the border into Honduras over the years just to survive and work the land. But, why were they so desperate to leave El Salvador in the first place? Well, the wealth inequality was just staggering. A massive 70% of all land in El Salvador was owned by just 5% of the farms. This heavily skewed distribution meant that roughly 200,000 Salvadoran peasants were entirely landless, forced to endure low wages and terrible working conditions. In fact, the concentration of wealth was so extreme that it was commonly said the entire country of El Salvador was effectively owned by just 14 elite landowning families. Just 14! It was this total lack of domestic opportunity that pushed those hundreds of thousands of citizens across the border into Honduras. So let's see how this builds to the actual breaking point. You have 300,000 Salvadoran migrants living in Honduras. But in 1969, the Honduran government initiated a land reform program. This program essentially expropriated landholdings from these non-citizen migrants, which sparked massive evictions. Soon, brutal anti-Salvadoran pogroms began, with mobs attacking and killing migrants in reprisal for the growing tensions heavily exacerbated by the hostility of those football matches we just discussed. With hundreds of thousands of its citizens being violently expelled and dispossessed, military conflict became an absolute inevitability. Section 5. The toll of the pitch. Following the final match on June 27th, El Salvador officially cut diplomatic ties with Honduras, citing the violence against its migrants. Then, on July 14th, things escalated rapidly. The Salvadoran military launched a coordinated attack, sending ground forces across the border and using planes to bomb Honduran targets. Honduras retaliated with aerial bombings of their own. This intense, fully armed conflict raged for 4 days until the Organization of American States successfully stepped in and negotiated a ceasefire on July 18th. The human cost of this 4-day war was absolutely devastating. It's estimated that up to 6,000 people were killed, the vast majority of them civilians. Furthermore, 50,000 people were displaced, losing their homes and their fields. This sobering casualty count really underscores the dark, tragic reality hidden behind that catchy soccer war moniker. It was a brutal conflict born of land, poverty, and desperation. As we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with this final thought. So, what really drives the world's most popular sporting events? When we look past the pitch, we don't just see a game. We see a mirror reflecting deep global inequalities, systemic pressures, and the raw realities of international geopolitics. The next time you watch a World Cup match, remember the complex machinery operating just beneath the surface. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep questioning what you see.